I am Grace Brewer, 35 years old, a sergeant in the California National Guard. I have spent my entire youth protecting this country, but I never expected that the most dangerous enemy was sleeping right in my own bed. That night, while my mother was burning with a fever of 104 degrees, groaning in pain in our living room, I received an emergency deployment order. I begged Mark, my husband, to just help Mom take her medicine and heat up some soup, but he didn't even bother to take off his gaming headset. His eyes were glued to the TV screen as he coldly said, "That old woman smells like garbage. You deal with her. I am not her nurse." That sentence cut deeper than any bayonet I have ever seen on the battlefield. He kicked my mother and me out onto the street in the middle of a rainstorm, believing we were destitute and homeless. But Mark made the biggest mistake of his life. He didn't know who the frail old woman he just humiliated actually was. Let me know where you are listening from in the comments, and hit that subscribe button right now if you believe the filthiest betrayal always comes from the people we call family. The bedroom smelled like sickly sweet cotton candy vape smoke, a scent that made my stomach turn. The digital clock on the nightstand read 2 in the morning. My hands were shaking, not from fear of the mission, but from the sound drifting in from the living room. The low, ragged moans of my mother, Violetta. She was spiraling. Her fever had spiked after a week of complications, and her body was fighting a war it was losing. I was frantically shoving my camouflage uniform into my field rucksack. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing on the bed. It was the call every soldier expects but dreads at the worst possible time. My commanding officer's voice had been clipped and absolute. "Emergency recall, Sergeant Brewer. Boots on the ground at base in 4 hours. No exceptions." I looked over at Mark. He was sitting in his gaming chair, bathed in the eerie blue glow of the 60-inch television. He was wearing his noise-canceling headphones, blasting away at virtual enemies in Call of Duty. The irony made me want to scream. I was being called to real duty, to pay the bills that kept the power on for his console, and he was playing soldier. I swallowed the lump in my throat and walked over, tapping him on the shoulder. I kept my voice low, desperate. "Mark, listen to me. I have to go. It's an emergency deployment. Please. I just need you to handle Mom. Just give her the fever reducers every 4 hours and heat up the canned soup. That is all." Mark didn't even pause the game. His fingers flew across the controller, the plastic clicking the only sound other than the gunfire from the TV. "No," he said, his voice flat. I froze. "What did you say?" "Mark, she has a fever of 104 degrees. She could seize." He finally pulled one earpiece back, looking at me with an expression of pure annoyance, like I was the inconvenience. "I said no, Grace. That is your mother, not mine. I didn't marry you to become a live-in nurse for a geriatric patient. She's been coughing her lungs out all night. It's disgusting. I can't even focus on my game. My rank is dropping because of the noise." The blood rushed to my head. I tried to reason with him. I tried to remind him that my National Guard paycheck was the only reason we had a roof over our heads, the only reason he could sit there and pretend to be incompetent. This was weaponized incompetence at its finest, feigning inability just to force me to do the labor. "Mark, please," I begged, my pride shattering. "I can't be in 2 places at once," he sneered, turning back to the screen. "So take her with you. I'm not cleaning up vomit or wiping anyone's drool. She smells like a corpse already. Get her out of my face." That was it. The soldier in me, the daughter in me. It all snapped. "Shut your mouth," I screamed. The volume of my voice made my mother give a startled, wet cough from the other room. Mark stood up fast, looming over me. "You dare raise your voice at me? In my house? That old hag is a burden, Grace. She is a parasite sucking us dry." My hand moved before I could think. Crack! I slapped him. Hard. It was a strike fueled by 5 years of carrying a deadbeat husband and a lifetime of protecting my mother. Mark touched his cheek, his eyes widening, then narrowing into slits. He didn't hit back. He did something worse. He smiled a cruel, victorious smile. "You hit me? Perfect. Get out." Take that parasite and get the hell out of my house right now before I call the cops and report you for domestic abuse. You think the guard will keep a sergeant with a domestic violence charge? He was bluffing about the law, but not about the eviction. He knew I wouldn't risk my clearance. He was throwing two helpless women out into the California rain in the middle of the night because he was too lazy to heat up soup. 10 minutes later, I was helping Mom into the passenger seat of my old Ford pickup truck. The rain was coming down in sheets, soaking us to the bone. Mom was shivering violently, clutching my arm with a grip that felt terrifyingly frail. I sat in the driver's seat, the engine sputtering to life. I looked at my phone. I had to make the call. "Command," I said when the line picked up, my voice trembling. "This is Sergeant Brewer. I can't report in." The silence on the other end was heavy. "Sergeant, you know the protocol. If you aren't here, you are marked absent without leave. You will lose your contract. You will lose your benefits. Is that what you want?" I looked at the house. Mark had already turned the porch light off. He was probably back in his game lobby. Then I looked at my mother, her face pale against the dark upholstery, her breathing shallow. "I understand, sir. I'm sorry." I hung up. In the span of an hour, I had lost my home, my marriage, and the career I had built my life around. My heart was breaking, but I refused to let it shatter completely. I know there are people out there who understand this kind of sacrifice. If you believe I did the right thing by choosing my sick mother over a toxic husband and a paycheck, please hit that like button to stand with us. And tell me honestly in the comments, would you have walked away too? Type yes if you would never leave your mother behind. But as I shifted the truck into drive, looking at the woman beside me, I knew I hadn't lost everything. "We are going, Mom," I whispered. "I've got you." The headlights cut through the darkness as we rolled away, leaving my old life behind in the rearview mirror, driving straight into a future that felt as black as the night around us. I pulled the truck into the parking lot of a Motel 6, right off the interstate. The neon sign buzzed with an irritating hum, the number 6 flickering like a dying heartbeat against the wet darkness. It was the cheapest place I could find that didn't look like an active crime scene, though it wasn't much better. The room smelled of stale, cold cigarette smoke masked by lemon industrial cleaner, the scent of desperation. I helped Mom into the stiff bed. The fever reducers I'd bought at a 24-hour pharmacy were finally kicking in, and she had drifted into a restless, exhausted sleep. I sat on the stained carpet, my back against the wall, and opened my wallet. I counted the bills. $42. That was it. That was all the liquidity I had access to until my next pay cycle, which might not even come now that I was technically AWOL. My stomach growled, a hollow, aching sound. I unwrapped a turkey sandwich I'd grabbed at the gas station. It was dry, tasteless, and cost $4. As I took a bite of the stale bread, a wave of nausea hit me. It wasn't the food, it was the memory. This taste, the taste of cheap, processed meat eaten in a cold room while rain hammered against the window, transported me back 30 years. Why did my life feel like a rerun of a bad movie? Why was I here again? My mind drifted back to when I was 6 years old. The night my father, Dorian Brewer, left us. It was raining that night, too. I remembered peering through the crack in my bedroom door, watching him pack his leather suitcase. He moved with a cold efficiency, not looking at the woman sobbing on the floor. "You are boring, Violetta," he had said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "You are small town and plain. I deserve better." He was leaving us for a woman 10 years younger, a waitress from the city. He left us with a rented house, a pile of unpaid utility bills, and a broken heart that my mother never truly recovered from. I remembered Mom crawling toward him, grabbing the hem of his pants. She wasn't begging for herself. She was begging for me. "Dorian, please," she had cried. "Grace needs a father." He kicked her leg away, not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to send a message. "You are nothing to me." Then he walked out the door and drove away. That night, I made a vow. I swore I would never be weak like Mom. I would join the army. I would be tough. I would be the one holding the gun. not the one begging on the floor. But sitting here in this motel room, the bitter truth washed over me. I had tried so hard to run away from my father's shadow that I ran straight into the arms of a man exactly like him. I met Mark at a veterans fundraiser 3 years ago. He wasn't aggressive like Dorian, he was insidious. He played the role of the nice guy perfectly. He had looked at my uniform with wide, admiring eyes. "You go protect the country, Grace," he had told me, holding my hands. "I will be your rock. I'll take care of the house. I'll treat your mom like she is my own flesh and blood." I was a soldier, trained to spot enemy ambushes, but I walked right into this trap. I was so desperate for the safety and male protection I never got from my father that I ignored every red flag. And there were so many red flags. The constant job hopping, he always had an excuse. The boss is a jerk. The work is beneath me. They don't respect my creativity. Then came the borrowing. First it was $20 for gas, then $200 for a new controller, then thousands to pay off his credit cards. I looked at my phone. It had been 24 hours since I drove away. No missed calls, no texts, not even an angry message demanding I bring the truck back. Just silence. Mark didn't love me. He loved the financial security I provided. He loved having a surrogate mother who cooked and cleaned while he played games. He was a leech, and I had been the willing host, draining myself dry to keep him fat and happy. A sound from the bed pulled me out of my spiraling thoughts. Mom was stirring. "Grace," she whispered, her voice raspy. I scrambled over to the bed, taking her thin, bony hand in mine. "I'm here, Mom. I'm right here." She opened her eyes, looking around the dingy room with confusion before reality settled in. Tears pooled in her eyes. "I am so sorry, baby. This is my fault. You lost your job because of me. You should have left me there. I am just a useless old woman." "Don't you ever say that," I said, my voice shaking. "You are not a burden. You are my mother." I reached into the breast pocket of my shirt and pulled out the small worn Bible I carried on every deployment. I didn't need to open it. I knew the verse by heart. It was the only thing that kept me sane when the world felt like it was ending. I leaned close to her ear and whispered Psalm 27, verse 10. "When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up." "Mark has forsaken us," I told her, my voice hardening. "And my father forsook us years ago. But we are not alone, Mom. We have each other, and we have the Lord. I will scrub toilets if I have to. I will shovel dirt. But I will never let anyone treat you like garbage again." Outside, an 18-wheeler roared past on the highway, shaking the thin walls of the room. The sound was loud and abrasive, but to me, it sounded like a battle cry. The tears on my face dried up. The sadness was being replaced by something else, a cold, steely resolve. Mark thought he had won. He thought he had discarded us. He had no idea that by cutting me loose, he had just freed me to become the warrior I was meant to be. I did not have time to cry. Tears do not pay for antibiotics, and they certainly do not put food on the table. I found work as a general laborer at a commercial construction site on the outskirts of Sacramento. The California sun was a brutal, unrelenting force, baking the earth until it cracked. I traded my crisp, respected military uniform for a neon yellow high-visibility vest and a pair of steel-toed boots that were already scuffed gray. My job was to haul 50-pound bags of Portland cement and stacks of drywall up 3 flights of stairs because the service elevator was broken. My hands, once steady enough to qualify as an expert marksman with a rifle, were now raw, blistered, and calloused. The men on the crew, roughnecks with sunburned necks and dip in their lips, tried to haze me at first. They whistled and made cracks about whether I could handle the load. I didn't say a word. I just glared at them with the cold, dead stare of a sergeant who has seen combat. They shut up quickly. To get through the 12-hour shifts, I kept one earbud in, hidden under my hard hat. I blasted David Goggins' podcasts on a loop. His voice screamed in my ear. "Who's gonna carry the boats? You don't know me, son." It was the only thing keeping me moving. I had to callous my mind. I worked until my muscles screamed, just so I could afford the high-protein organic shakes and specialized medication Mom needed. Every night, I washed the drywall dust off my face in the motel sink and lied to her. "The office job is great, Mom," I would say, hiding my trembling hands behind my back. "Just a lot of filing." 1 week later, I had to go back to the house. I needed Mom's medical insurance paperwork and a few pieces of my gear that I could pawn for quick cash. I chose to go at noon on a Tuesday, hoping Mark would be asleep or out. As I pulled up to the curb, my stomach dropped. The house, which I used to spend my weekends landscaping, looked like a dump. The grass was overgrown, knee-high and yellowing. The overflow trash cans were knocked over, spilling empty beer bottles and moldy pizza boxes onto the driveway. I killed the engine, my heart hammering against my ribs. Something felt wrong. "Grace!" I turned to see Mrs. Carter, our elderly neighbor, peering over her rose bushes. She waved me over frantically. I walked to the fence and she leaned in, whispering like she was sharing state secrets. "Honey, you came at the right time. He isn't alone in there. There is a car that has been parking overnight for 3 days, a redhead. She struts around like she owns the place." A cold chill went down my spine, instantly vaporizing the heat of the afternoon. I thanked her and walked to the front door. I put my key in the lock, half expecting him to have changed it, but Mark was too lazy for that. The smell hit me the moment I stepped into the entryway. It was a suffocating mix of stale air, pepperoni grease, and cheap, cloying drugstore perfume. Something vanilla and desperate. I walked into the living room and froze. On the floral armchair, my mother's favorite chair, where she used to sit and knit blankets for charity, lay a pair of bright red lace panties. They were tossed there carelessly, a flag of conquest on my mother's territory. I felt bile rise in my throat. Then I heard it. A giggle. It was a high-pitched, girlish sound coming from the master bedroom, followed by Mark's voice, not the depressed, "I can't work" voice he used with me, but a confident, arrogant laugh. I walked down the hallway, my boots heavy on the hardwood. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. Through the crack, I saw the flicker of the TV screen. They were watching a movie on the 60-inch screen I had bought with my re-enlistment bonus. I didn't knock. I shoved the door open so hard the handle punched a hole in the drywall. Mark scrambled, pulling the sheet up, but not before I saw them. He was in bed with a woman who looked no older than 22. She had dyed cherry red hair and was wearing enough makeup to perform in a circus. Mark blinked, his eyes adjusting to the light. He didn't look scared. He looked annoyed. "What are you doing here?" he snapped, as if I were the intruder. "Finished begging on the streets?" The redhead sat up, not even bothering to cover herself properly. She looked me up and down, my dusty work boots, my stained jeans, my messy bun, and curled her lip in disgust. "This is your wife?" she laughed, popping her gum. "Wow, Mark, you weren't kidding. She looks like a man. Are you sure she isn't a dude?" The insult hung in the air. A week ago, I might have cried. Today, after hauling cement for 7 days straight, I felt nothing but icy rage. I stood tall, filling the doorway with my presence. "I am here for my paperwork," I said, my voice deadly calm. "And to give you a courtesy notice. I am filing for divorce. You have 24 hours to clean up this filth and get out of my mother's house." Mark laughed, a loud barking sound. He wrapped his arm around the girl, pulling her close. "Your mother's house?" he smirked. "You didn't check the laws, did you, genius? I have established residency. This is my home, and honestly, that old hag is going to kick the bucket any day now. Once she dies, I am claiming squatters' rights on everything. I am the victim here, Grace. You abandoned me." He looked me dead in the eye, his face twisted with malice. "I hope she dies tonight so I can finally sell this place and get a real house." He thought he had won. He thought he was untouchable. He didn't notice that my hand was in my pocket. He didn't know that the moment I saw the red panties, I had opened the voice recorder app on my phone. I had every word. "Enjoy the movie, Mark," I said, backing out of the room. "It will be the last thing you ever enjoy." The following morning, the parking lot of the Motel 6 felt less like a place of rest and more like a concrete oven baking under the California sun. I was outside, gently holding my mother by the arm, helping her take small, shuffling steps with her aluminum walker. The fresh air was good for her damaged lungs, even if the view was nothing but cracked asphalt and overflowing dumpsters. Suddenly, the peace was shattered by the aggressive, ear-splitting roar of a modified engine. A brand new, lifted black Ford pickup truck, shiny, massive, and screaming midlife crisis, swerved into the lot, tires screeching as it halted just inches from where we stood. My stomach turned. I knew that truck. Or rather, I knew the man who would rent a truck like that just to look important while his life was falling apart. Mark hopped out of the driver's side, wearing designer sunglasses he definitely couldn't afford. From the passenger side emerged the redhead, Rachel. She was wearing a denim miniskirt so short it was practically a belt, and she was popping pink bubblegum with an obnoxious, wet smack, smack, smack sound. They hadn't come to apologize. They had come to pick the bones of the carcass. "Well, look who it is," Rachel sneered, looking my mother up and down with exaggerated disgust. "Oh my God, is she still alive? Mark told me she was practically in the grave already." Mark laughed, a loud barking sound that made my skin crawl. He walked over and slapped Rachel on her backside. "Any day now, babe. Just waiting for nature to take out the trash so Grace here is left with nothing but debt." He turned his gaze to me, and his smile vanished, replaced by a look of greedy entitlement. "I am here for my stuff, Grace. Since we are getting divorced, we need to split assets immediately. I want the 60-inch Samsung TV and the Bose surround sound system. You bought them, but I used them the most, so they are legally mine." I stepped in front of my mother, my hands balling into fists. "Get out," I warned, my voice low. "This is not your property. You have no right to be here." Mark stepped closer, invading my personal space. He jabbed a finger into my forehead. "Who do you think you are? You are just an unemployed grunt now. I am the man of the house. I watched that TV every single day while you were playing soldier. It belongs to me." Rachel chimed in, leaning against the truck and blowing a bubble. "Look at you two," she laughed. "You look homeless. Did you have to dig through the trash for breakfast? Mark, hurry up and get the TV so we can leave. They smell like poverty." People were starting to stare. Doors to other motel rooms opened. A truck driver paused while cleaning his windshield. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. Not from shame, but from a rage so pure it threatened to blind me. I was about to tackle Mark into the asphalt, consequences be damned. But then I felt a hand on my arm. It was my mother. She wasn't trembling anymore. Before I could move, Mrs. Carter, the kind neighbor who had followed us to the motel to bring us some homemade stew, stepped out from behind her car. She couldn't take it anymore. "You idiots!" Mrs. Carter screamed, her voice booming across the parking lot with a ferocity that silenced the traffic on the highway. "Do you have any idea who you are talking to?" Mark blinked, confused. "Shut up, old lady. Go back to your knitting." "Violetta isn't a beggar," Mrs. Carter yelled, pointing a shaking finger at my mother. "She owns the entire block you were renting on. She owns 10 rental properties across the county and 2 commercial zones downtown. She is worth millions." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the truck driver dropped his squeegee. Mark froze, his mouth hung open, looking like a fish gasping for air. Rachel stopped chewing her gum, her eyes darting between Mark and my mother. Mrs. Carter wasn't finished. She lived simply because she wanted to raise her daughter to value hard work, not handouts. She has more money in her checking account right now than you will make in 10 lifetimes. I turned to look at my mother, stunned. I knew she was frugal, but millions? Mom stood up straighter than I'd seen her in years. She pushed her walker aside slightly and looked Mark dead in the eye. The frail, sick woman was gone. In her place was a matriarch. "That is correct," Mom said, her voice clear and authoritative. "I intended to gift a significant portion of my estate to you and Grace, Mark. I wanted to see if you were a man of character who would care for me in my sickness." Mark's face went from red to a ghostly white. He began to stammer, sweat beading on his forehead. "Mom. Violetta. Wait, 10 houses." Rachel physically recoiled from him, looking at him with sudden disdain. She realized she had bet on the wrong horse. You failed the test, Mom said, delivering the final blow. You treated me like garbage because you thought I had no value. You just kicked away the winning lottery ticket of your life, Mark. Mark stood there, paralyzed by the realization of the fortune he had just thrown away because he was too lazy to heat up a can of soup. Around us, the onlookers began to chuckle, and then laugh out loud at the fool standing by his rented truck. He had lost everything, and he had no one to blame but himself. It took exactly 48 hours for the scent of money to drift across town and reach Mark. News in a small town travels faster than a wildfire in dry season, especially when it involves a homeless old woman turning out to be a secret millionaire. 2 days after the incident in the parking lot, Mark returned to the Motel 6. But this time, the shiny black truck and the miniskirt-wearing mistress were gone. He arrived on foot, walking from the bus stop down the road, sweating in the midday heat. He was wearing his wedding suit, a charcoal gray ensemble that he hadn't touched in 5 years. It didn't fit him anymore. The buttons on the jacket were straining against his stomach, a testament to years of sitting in a gaming chair eating takeout while I worked double shifts. In his hand, he clutched a dozen roses wrapped in crinkly plastic. I could see the orange price sticker still on the wrapper, $9.99. Gas station flowers. I stood in the doorway of room 112, arms crossed over my chest, watching him approach. I didn't feel the flutter in my heart that I used to feel when he looked at me. I felt the cold, clinical detachment of a soldier observing a hostile target. Mark didn't just walk up to me, he threw himself into a performance. He dropped to his knees right there on the dirty concrete walkway, ignoring the stares of the housekeeper pushing her cart. "Grace!" he wailed, tears streaming down his face. It was a terrible acting job. "Oh God, Grace, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened to me. I was lost. I was confused." He held the wilting roses up to me like an offering to a deity. "It was Rachel. She manipulated me, Grace. She got into my head. I think she drugged me or put some kind of spell on me. I never stopped loving you, baby. You know that, right? We are soulmates." He looked past me, trying to peer into the room. "Mom? Violetta? Is Mom in there? Please let me speak to her. I need to apologize to my favorite mother-in-law. I was just stressed that night, Mom. You know I didn't mean those things." The sound of his whining voice, dripping with fake sincerity, made bile rise in the back of my throat. He wasn't here because he missed me. He wasn't here because he regretted throwing his sick mother-in-law out into the rain. He was here because he had done the math. He was here because he realized the parasite he kicked out was actually a golden goose. I stepped out onto the walkway, closing the door behind me to shield my mother from his toxicity. I looked down at him, my expression unmoving. "Mark," I said. My voice was terrifyingly calm. It was the voice I used when giving orders to junior enlisted soldiers who had messed up. "Get up. You are embarrassing yourself." "I will stay here until you forgive me," he sobbed, reaching for the hem of my jeans. I took a step back, out of his reach. "I have one question for you," I said, cutting through his theatrics. "And I want you to answer it honestly for the first time in your life. If Mrs. Carter hadn't screamed out the truth 2 days ago, if my mother was still just a sick, poor old woman living on Social Security, would you be kneeling here right now?" Mark froze. His eyes darted to the left, then to the right, searching for the lie that would save him. The tears stopped instantly. "Of course," he stammered, sweating profusely. I realized my mistake before I even heard about the houses. I was coming back anyway." I let out a short, dry laugh. "You are a liar. 48 hours ago, you stood in this exact spot and called her a corpse. You said you hoped she would die so you could sell her furniture. You aren't sorry, Mark. You are just greedy." The door behind me opened. My mother stepped out. She wasn't using her walker. She stood holding a plastic pitcher of ice water we had gotten from the motel ice machine. Mark's face lit up with a predatory hope. "Mom! Violetta, please, tell her." Splash! Mom threw the entire pitcher of freezing water squarely into Mark's face. Ideally, it washed away the fake tears and the sweat, leaving him dripping and sputtering in his tight suit. "Wake up, son-in-law," Mom said, her voice sharp as a whip. "That water is cleaner than your soul. You think I hid my wealth to trick you? No. I hid it to protect myself from parasites like you. I grabbed the cheap roses from his hand and tossed them into the trash can next to the vending machine. I am a soldier, Mark, I told him, stepping closer until I was towering over his kneeling form. I am trained to spot enemies in camouflage, and you are the worst kind of enemy. You hid behind a wedding ring to steal my life. You don't deserve a single penny from my family. Now get out of here before I call the cops and have you arrested for harassment. I have the recordings, remember? For a second, Mark stayed on his knees, water dripping from his nose. Then, the mask fell off completely. The sorry husband vanished, replaced instantly by the monster I had seen in the bedroom. He jumped to his feet, his face twisting into a mask of pure, ugly hatred. His hands balled into fists. "Fine!" he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "You want to play hardball? Let's play. You think you can just walk away with millions and leave me with nothing? I have rights." He pointed a shaking finger at my face. "We are married, Grace, and we live in California. That means we are under community property laws. Anything that appreciated in value during our marriage is fair game. I will sue you. I will drag you and that old witch through every court in this state until I get half of everything. I will bleed you dry." He turned and stormed off toward the road, his wet shoes squishing loudly with every step. But as I watched him go, a cold knot formed in my stomach. He wasn't just ranting, he was quoting the law. And a desperate, greedy man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous enemy of all. The battle wasn't over. It had just begun. 1 week later, the knock on the door wasn't Mark. It was a process server, a bored-looking man with a clipboard who shoved a thick yellow envelope into my chest. "You have been served," he mumbled, turning away before I could even blink. I tore open the seal, my fingers trembling. The header on the legal summons made the air leave my lungs. Mark Johnson and Dorian Brewer versus Violetta Brewer. My stomach dropped. Mark hadn't just made a threat, he had made an alliance. That afternoon, the gravel of the Motel 6 parking lot crunched under the tires of a car that had no business being in this neighborhood. It was a sleek, black Mercedes S-Class, polished to a mirror shine. It parked right next to my rusted, beat-up Ford truck, a visual insult of wealth versus survival. The doors opened. Mark stepped out first, wearing that same smug, punchable grin. Then Rachel, popping her gum. And finally, from the back seat, emerged a man I hadn't seen in nearly 30 years. Dorian Brewer, my father. He didn't look like the monster of my nightmares. He looked like a successful businessman. He was wearing a tailored navy suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his skin tanned from years of leisure. He looked healthy. He looked rich. He looked nothing like the woman inside the room who had worked herself into a wheelchair to clean up his mess. I stood in the doorway, paralyzed. The man who had abandoned me when I was 6 years old was standing 10 feet away. He didn't look at me with love. He didn't look at me with regret. He barely looked at me at all. His eyes slid past me, predatory and cold, locking onto my mother, who had stepped out behind me. "Hello, Violetta," Dorian said, his voice smooth like oil. "It has been a long time. You look wealthy." He didn't ask about her health. He didn't ask how I was. He talked about money. Dorian walked over to Rachel, who was leaning against the Mercedes checking her nails. Then, he did something that made the world stop spinning. He wrapped his arm around Rachel's waist, not in a romantic way, but in a possessive, familial way. "Grace," Dorian said, gesturing to the redhead mistress. "I don't believe you have been properly introduced. This is Rachel, my daughter from my second marriage. She is very smart, just like her father." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. I looked at Rachel, then at Mark, then back at Rachel. Rachel was Dorian's daughter. Rachel was my half-sister. I felt vomit rise in my throat, hot and acidic. I looked at Mark and the look on his face was pure, unadulterated evil. He knew. He had known the whole time. "It is a small world, isn't it, Grace?" Mark laughed, stepping between the father and the daughter. He put one arm around Rachel and looked at me with a sick sense of pride. "I guess I have a type. keeping it in the family. Now we really are all one big, happy family. Father-in-law and son-in-law, united for justice. My knees almost buckled. My husband had been sleeping with my sister. My father was conspiring with my ex-husband. It was an incestuous, moral cesspool that defied every law of human decency. "You are sick," I whispered, my voice shaking. "You are all sick." Dorian stepped forward, unbothered by the moral horror show he had created. He pulled a copy of the lawsuit from his jacket pocket. "Save the drama, Grace," Dorian said dismissively. "I am here for business. You see, when I left 30 years ago, Violetta and I never filed the final divorce decree. We just separated. Legally, in the state of California, we remain married. And since California is a community property state, any assets acquired during the marriage are subject to a 50-50 split." He smiled, a shark smelling blood. "Those 10 houses, those commercial lots, half of that portfolio belongs to me. I am here to collect my share of the marital assets." Mark chimed in, bouncing on the balls of his feet. "And I am suing for half of Grace's future inheritance plus alimony. We are going to strip you two down until you don't even have underwear left." The shock finally broke. The soldier in me took over. The disgust I felt for these people hardened into a cold, diamond-sharp rage. I stepped off the curb, getting right in Dorian's face. I smelled his expensive cologne, covering the stench of his rotten soul. "You walked out on a 6-year-old girl in the rain," I hissed, my voice low and dangerous. "You never sent a birthday card. You never sent a dime of child support. You let my mother scrub floors to feed me. And now you come back because you smell cash? You aren't a father. You aren't a husband. You aren't even a man." I turned to Mark and Rachel. "And you two. You are a biological anomaly. A twist of nature so disgusting it belongs in a medical textbook. I know this is hard to listen to. The level of betrayal here is beyond anything a human should have to endure. If you are as disgusted by this unholy alliance as I am, and if you're ready to see Grace destroy them in court, please hit that like button right now. And tell me in the comments, what is the worst kind of betrayal? A cheating partner or a parent who chooses money over their child? Type Mark or Dorian to let me know who you hate more. I looked back at the trio, the father, the sister, the husband, standing by their shiny car. "You think the law protects greed?" I asked, backing up to stand beside my mother. "You think you can intimidate us? I have fought in war zones, Dorian. I have faced enemies with guns. You three are nothing but cowards in expensive clothes." "I will see you in court," I declared, my voice echoing off the motel walls. "And I will fight you until my last breath. I will sell my blood before I let you touch a single cent of my mother's money." I grabbed my mother's hand and slammed the motel door in their faces, shutting out the monsters, but knowing the real war had just begun. Mark and Dorian did not just want to win in court, they wanted to destroy me in the court of public opinion first. They launched a dirty, calculated smear campaign on Facebook. Mark posted long, tearful statuses, casting himself as the devoted husband who had been emotionally abused by a cold, unfeeling soldier. He fabricated stories about me having affairs during my deployments. He claimed my mother had swindled Dorian out of his life savings 30 years ago and was now hoarding wealth while he, her lawful husband, suffered. The lies spread through our small town like a virus. When I walked into the local grocery store to buy bread and peanut butter, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. I saw a woman I'd known since high school whisper to her husband, pointing at me near the produce section. "That's her," I heard a man mutter in the checkout line. "That's the greedy one who kicked her husband out." The shame burned hotter than any sunburn. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake them and tell them the truth. But I knew that a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. I kept my head down, clutching my mother's medication, and repeated Romans 12, verse 19 in my head. "Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." I had to believe that, because the legal system certainly wasn't helping. For 2 days, I went door to door to every law firm in the county. I held my file folder like a shield, begging for someone to represent us. But Dorian had done his homework. He had retained the most expensive shark firm in the city, creating a conflict of interest for half the lawyers in town. The other half took one look at my bank account and shook their heads. "It is a losing battle, Ms. Brewer," one old attorney told me, not even inviting me to sit down. "California community property laws are complex. If your father can prove he never legally divorced your mother, and if he can argue that he contributed even $1 to the household initially, he has a case. Fighting him will cost $50,000 just to start." Do you have $50,000? I didn't have $50. I sat on a peeling wooden bench in the park, staring up at the gray, overcast sky. I felt a crushing weight on my chest. Was this how it ended? With the villains drinking champagne in my mother's house while we slept in a truck? When I got back to the Motel 6, defeated and broken, Mom was waiting for me. She wasn't lying in bed. She was sitting on the floor, struggling to pull something out from under the bed frame. "Grace," she said, her voice unusually strong. "Help me with this." I pulled out a heavy, rusted metal lockbox. It looked like it hadn't seen the light of day since the Reagan administration. "I have kept this for 30 years, Mom said, blowing the dust off the lid. I knew Dorian. I knew a man like that never truly leaves until he has taken everything. I knew this day might come. She fished a small key out of her bra and unlocked it. Inside, the smell of old paper wafted out. There were stacks of yellowed documents, carefully preserved in plastic bags. "What is this?" I asked. "These," she said, handing me a stack of papers, "are the bank statements from 1985. They prove that every single cent used to buy the first property came from an inheritance left to me by your grandmother. In California, inheritance is separate property, Grace, not community property. He can't touch it." My heart skipped a beat, but she wasn't done. "And this," she said, handing me a single folded piece of notebook paper, "is the silver bullet." I unfolded the paper. It was a handwritten note, dated the night Dorian left. It was scrawled in his distinct, flamboyant handwriting. I read it, and my eyes widened. It was a signed agreement. With this ammunition, I made one last stop. I drove to the outskirts of town, to a small, messy office above a dry cleaner. The sign on the door read, "Henry Vance, Attorney at Law." Henry was a retired JAG officer, a former military lawyer known as the Bulldog. He was 70 years old, smoked cheap cigars inside his office, and hated bullies. I sat across from his cluttered desk and laid everything out. The smear campaign, the incestuous alliance between Mark and Rachel, the lawsuit, and finally, the contents of the lockbox. Henry read the handwritten note silently. He read it twice. Then he took the cigar out of his mouth and looked at me. His eyes, usually tired and cynical, were burning with a terrifying fire. "He abandoned his post," Henry growled, his voice low and dangerous. "He left a woman and a child behind to starve, and now he wants a medal for it? That son of a bitch." "I don't have any money to pay you, sir," I said quietly. "But if we win—" Henry slammed his hand down on the desk, making me jump. "Money? I don't want your money, Sergeant. I want his scalp." He stood up and extended a hand to me. "I am taking the case. Pro bono. Go home and get some sleep, soldier." He looked at the calendar on his wall and smiled a grim, predatory smile. "Tomorrow morning, we aren't just going to win. We are going to bury them." The Superior Court of California was packed to capacity. The air inside the oak-paneled room was stifling, smelling of floor wax and nervous sweat. I sat at the defendant's table next to Henry. My hands were clenched so tightly in my lap that my knuckles had turned white. Across the aisle, at the plaintiff's table, sat the unholy alliance. Dorian and Mark were whispering and chuckling, looking like two men who had already spent the money they were about to steal. Dorian's high-priced lawyer, a man in a $3,000 suit, opened with a speech that painted a fantasy world. He described Dorian as a devoted father forced away by circumstances, and Mark as a loving husband victimized by a fraudulent marriage. When Dorian took the stand, he adjusted his silk tie and looked the jury dead in the eye. "I never abandoned my family," Dorian lied, his voice smooth as glass. I went to the city to find work to support them. Violetta was the one who cut me off. She hid assets from me. She bought those properties with money that should have been ours. I am simply here to claim what is rightfully mine under the law." Then it was Mark's turn. He sat there, playing the victim card with nauseating skill. "Grace was cold," he sniffled. "She cared more about her career than our marriage. And she was violent. She threw me out without a penny." I felt a vein throb in my temple. The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, was taking furious notes. My heart hammered against my ribs. What if she believed them? Then Henry Vance stood up. He didn't walk to the podium. He limped slightly, moving like the old bulldog he was. He didn't use fancy words. He went straight for the jugular. "Mr. Brewer," Henry said, his voice gravelly, "you claim you never voluntarily abandoned your rights to the marital assets, correct?" "That is correct," Dorian smiled smugly. "Then please explain this." Henry pulled a plastic evidence bag from his briefcase. Inside was the yellowed, fragile piece of notebook paper my mother had kept in the rusted lockbox for 30 years. Henry placed it on the overhead projector. Dorian's flamboyant handwriting appeared on the courtroom screens for everyone to see. "This is a document dated November 12, 1990, Henry read aloud. "It states, 'I, Dorian Brewer, accept the sum of $5,000 to pay off my gambling debts. In exchange, I hereby renounce all claims to Violetta Brewer's assets, present and future, and waive all parental rights.'" A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Dorian's face went from a confident tan to a sickly shade of gray. He gripped the railing of the witness stand. He had forgotten. He had assumed my mother, the woman he called stupid, had thrown it away decades ago. That is a forgery," Dorian stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "It is notarized, Mr. Brewer," Henry said, pointing to the stamp at the bottom. "And we have the notary's logbook from 1990 to prove it. You sold your family for $5,000 to pay a bookie." Henry didn't stop there. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, since Mr. Brewer has admitted under oath that he is the father, I would like to address the matter of child support." Dorian's eyes widened. "For 29 years, Mr. Brewer has paid $0, Henry continued, pulling out a calculator. "Under California law, unpaid child support accumulates interest at 10% per year, calculating the principal plus statutory interest and penalties. Mr. Brewer currently owes the estate of Violetta Brewer exactly $450,000. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Dorian slumped in his chair, looking like he was about to vomit. "And as for Mr. Mark Johnson," Henry pivoted, turning his gaze to my ex-husband. "You claim you are entitled to community property because you were a devoted husband." Henry signaled to the bailiff. "Defense enters Exhibit B, security camera footage provided by a neighbor, Mrs. Carter." The large screen flickered to life. The audio was grainy but unmistakable. It showed Mark standing in the driveway with Rachel, laughing. "That old hag is going to kick the bucket any day now." Mark's voice boomed through the courtroom speakers. "Once she dies, I am claiming squatters' rights. I hope she dies tonight." Then the video showed him kissing Rachel, my sister, while I was at work. Mark sank lower in his seat, covering his face with his hands. There was no way to spin this. The jury looked at him with pure disgust. The judge didn't need to hear any more. She set her pen down and looked over her glasses at the two men. "I have heard enough," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. She raised her gavel. "Mr. Brewer, your claim to the properties is denied based on the 1990 waiver. Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate audit of your assets to begin garnishing wages for the $450,000 in back child support." Dorian let out a choked sob. "Mr. Johnson," the judge continued, looking at Mark with disdain, "your petition for spousal support and asset division is denied with prejudice. You are also ordered to pay the defendant's legal fees." Bang! The sound of the gavel striking the wood block echoed like a gunshot. It was the sound of justice. It was the sound of the end. In the gallery, Rachel stood up. She took one look at her father, who was now $500,000 in debt, and her lover, who was penniless. She grabbed her designer purse and walked out the back door without a backward glance. The rats were fleeing the sinking ship. Dorian sat trembling, staring at his hands. Mark had his head on the table. I stood up. I looked at my mother across the room. She was smiling, tears streaming down her face. We had won. The nightmare was finally over. Walking out of the county courthouse, the bright California sun hit my face, but for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel oppressive. It felt cleansing. Behind me, the unholy alliance that had tried to destroy my life was disintegrating in real time. It was a pathetic sight to behold. Rachel was standing on the curb, furiously typing on her phone. She wasn't looking at her father or her lover. She was looking for an escape route. A silver sedan with an Uber sticker in the window pulled up, and she opened the door without a word. "Rachel, wait!" Mark shouted, running after her like a lost puppy. "Where are you going? We need to figure this out." Rachel paused, one foot in the car. She looked back at Mark, then at Dorian, with a sneer that could strip paint. "Figure what out?" she spat. "You are broke, Mark. And you," she pointed at Dorian, "are hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. I don't hang out with losers. Have fun in jail, Dad." She slammed the car door shut. The vehicle sped off, leaving a cloud of exhaust and two stunned men in its wake. The silence lasted less than a second before the infighting began. Dorian turned on Mark, his face red with fury. "This was your idea," he screamed, shoving Mark's shoulder. "You said she was weak. You said she would settle out of court. Now they are going to garnish my Social Security." "My idea," Mark yelled back, his voice cracking. "You are the one who signed that waiver 30 years ago. You idiot, you cost me everything." They were like wild dogs fighting over a bone that had already been taken away. The failure had stripped away their masks, revealing the cowardly, hollow men beneath. I started walking toward my truck, my arm linked with my mother's. But Mark saw us. He broke away from Dorian and sprinted toward me, desperation etched into every line of his face. "Grace! Grace, wait!" He reached out to grab my hand. My reaction was instinctual. I recoiled as if I had touched a hot stove, stepping back and putting my hand up in a tactical stop motion. "Don't touch me," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was absolute. Mark stopped, panting. He tried to summon tears, but his eyes were dry. "Grace, please, you have to listen. I was tricked. It was Rachel and your dad. They gaslit me. They manipulated me into doing this. I never wanted to hurt you. I was a victim too." I looked at him, really looked at him for the last time. I didn't see the man I married. I saw a stranger. "You are not a victim, Mark," I said coldly. "You are an accomplice. You are a grown man who made a choice to betray his wife for a paycheck. You gambled and you lost. Do not ever come near me or my mother again. If I see your truck on my street, I will have you arrested for violating a court order." I turned my back on him. That was the hardest part, ignoring the urge to scream, to explain, to justify. But I knew that with a narcissist, any attention is good attention. Silence is the only weapon that truly hurts them. "Grace." The second voice was older, wearier. Dorian was standing by the bumper of my truck. He looked 10 years older than he had inside the courtroom. His expensive suit suddenly looked too big for him. "Grace," he said, his voice trembling. I can't pay that money. $450,000. I will be destitute. I am an old man. You can't let your own father face this. Please, talk to Violetta. Ask her to drop the debt." I looked at the man who had given me half my DNA and none of his time. I searched my heart for anger, for hate, for the burning rage that had fueled me all week. But it was gone. All that was left was pity. "You made a choice, Dorian," I said softly. 30 years ago, you chose to walk out on a 6-year-old girl because she was inconvenient. You chose to sign that paper for $5,000 because you valued gambling more than your family. And today, you chose to sue us because you valued greed over dignity. He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. "Every choice has a price tag," I told him. "You have been running up a tab for 3 decades. Today, the bill finally came due." "I don't hate you, Dorian. I don't have enough energy to hate you. But I certainly don't owe you salvation. Be a man for the first time in your life and pay your debts. I opened the passenger door for Mom. She didn't look at Dorian. To her, he was already a ghost. I got into the driver's seat and started the engine. The old Ford rumbled to life, a sound that felt like a heartbeat returning to a chest that had stopped. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. Mark was sitting on the curb, head in his hands. Dorian was standing alone in the middle of the asphalt, watching us leave. They looked small. They looked insignificant. I am proud of you, Grace, Mom said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. Her grip was stronger today. You fought like a true warrior. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air conditioning of the truck mixed with the scent of rain-washed pavement. I learned from the best, I smiled at her. I looked out the windshield. The storm clouds that had hovered over California for days were breaking apart. Shafts of golden afternoon sunlight were piercing through the gray, illuminating the highway ahead. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't something I had to give to Mark or Dorian. Forgiveness was a gift I was giving to myself. I was forgiving myself for loving the wrong man. I was forgiving myself for wanting a father who didn't exist. I hit the turn signal and merged onto the freeway, leaving the courthouse, the lawsuit, and the toxic men behind me. The road ahead was wide open, and for the first time in a long time, the view was beautiful. 12 months later, the view from my window was very different from the cracked asphalt of the Motel 6. I stood on the second floor of a commercial building in downtown Sacramento, looking out through the glass walls of my office. On the wall behind my mahogany desk, next to a framed photo of my mother and me, hung a large American flag and a certificate that read, Brewers Security and Logistics, Certified Veteran-Owned Small Business. I hadn't used my mother's newfound wealth to buy a yacht or a mansion. That isn't who we are. Instead, with Violetta's blessing, we sold one small commercial lot on the edge of town. I used the capital to build something that mattered. I founded a company that specialized in high-risk transport and private security. But my business plan had a specific mandate. When I looked out onto the dispatch floor, I didn't just see employees, I saw a squad. I saw Sarah, a former Marine and single mother who had been living in her car before I interviewed her. I saw Maria, a Navy vet who was fired from her last job because she needed time off for childcare. I hired the people society had thrown away. I gave them good wages, full benefits, and a sense of purpose. I wanted to build the second family I had desperately searched for my entire life. Boss, a voice called out. The quarterly reports are ready for review. I turned to see my mother walking in. She wasn't using a walker anymore. She had a cane, but it was mostly for style. She was wearing a sharp beige blazer and looked 10 years younger. Thank you, Madam CFO, I smiled. Violetta Brewer wasn't just a silent partner. Once her health stabilized, her sharp mind returned with a vengeance. She became my financial advisor, teaching me how to invest, how to manage overhead, and how to spot a bad deal from a mile away. You are underestimating the ROI on the new fleet, she chided gently, tapping the paper. We need to be aggressive, Grace, just like in the courtroom. We spent our weekends doing charity work, delivering meals to elderly shut-ins, people who were just like Mom had been, alone and vulnerable. We turned our past trauma into a fuel source to warm others. I realized then that the 10 houses weren't the real inheritance Mom had given me. The real inheritance was her grit. It was the lesson that you can be beaten down to the dirt and still rise up to build a castle. Of course, in a small town, echoes of the past still drifted our way. Mrs. Carter came by for tea on Sundays, and she always brought the neighborhood gossip. That was how I knew about Mark. Karma, as it turns out, has a very specific sense of humor. To pay his legal fees and the court-ordered judgments, Mark had to sell everything. The 60-inch TV, the surround sound system, and yes, even the ridiculous lifted truck. He was now living in a studio apartment above a noisy bar. Mrs. Carter saw him last week. He was riding a bicycle, wearing a neon backpack, delivering lukewarm burritos for a food delivery app. He looked older, heavier, and miserable. He was working harder for $5 a tip than he ever worked for our marriage. As for Dorian, the courts had frozen his assets to begin the garnishment process for the back child support. Rachel had vanished the moment the money dried up, leaving him in a large, empty house with no one to fetch him a glass of water when he fell ill. He was ending his life exactly as he had lived it, entirely alone. I didn't feel happy about their suffering. I didn't feel sad either. I just felt the cool, detached satisfaction of seeing the universe balance its books. That evening, I stood backstage at the Sacramento Convention Center. I checked my reflection in the mirror. I was wearing a tailored navy blue power suit. My hair was pulled back, my makeup was flawless, and my eyes were clear. "Please welcome," the announcer's voice boomed, "CEO and community leader, Grace Brewer." I walked out into the blinding spotlight. The applause washed over me, warm and inviting. In the audience, I saw hundreds of women. Some were young, some were old. Some had bruises they were trying to hide, others had scars they wore openly. I gripped the microphone, looking out at the sea of faces. I spotted my mother in the front row, beaming. "A year ago," I began, my voice steady and strong. "I was sleeping in a truck in the rain. I had lost my job, my husband, and my home. The people who were supposed to love me, my father and my husband, tried to destroy me. They looked at me and my mother, and they saw trash. They tried to bury us." I paused, letting the silence fill the room. "But they made a critical mistake," I said, leaning in. "They didn't know that we were seeds." A ripple of agreement went through the crowd. They thought that by taking away my safety, I would crumble. But they only forced me to find my own strength. I'm here to tell you that you do not need a prince to save you. You do not need a father to validate you. And you certainly do not need a husband who treats you like an option. I raised my head high, channeling every ounce of pain and victory into my final words. Do not ever let anyone tell you that you are not enough. Do not sacrifice your dignity for someone who does not respect your existence. Stand up. Fight for yourself. Fight for your loved ones. Because in the story of your life, you are not the victim. You are the hero. The room exploded. Hundreds of women stood up, clapping, cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes. I smiled, a genuine, bone-deep smile. I had lost the battle for my marriage, but I had won the war for my life. And looking at the future stretching out before me, I knew the best chapters were still yet to be written. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my journey, it is this. Your value does not decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth. For years, I confused loyalty with servitude. I thought that if I loved harder or gave more, Mark would finally step up. But I learned the hard way that you cannot love someone into respecting you. Real love does not ask you to shrink so they can feel big. Whether you are 35 or 65, it is never too late to redraw your boundaries. You are not starting over from scratch. You are starting over from experience. Trust your gut, protect your peace, and remember that the most important relationship you will ever have is the one with yourself. Now, I want to hear from you. We all have a Mark or a Dorian in our past, someone who underestimated us or tried to bring us down. What was the moment you finally stood up and said, "Enough"? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one because your stories give me strength, and they might help someone else reading them feel less alone. And if you believe that justice always finds a way, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let's keep sharing stories that matter. Until next time, stay strong and keep fighting the good fight.